Welcome to this Arab News special interview with Abdel-Mageed Yahia, the World Food Programme's representative to the GCC, who will shed light on food insecurity in the world in general and the Middle East and North Africa in particular, and how the conflict in Ukraine and Sudan are disrupting food supplies and pushing prices up. Mr. Abdel-Mageed Yahia, welcome.
Thank you.
The World Food Programme says there is a global hunger crisis of unprecedented proportions. Unless food needs are met, there will be a hunger on a catastrophic scale. How did such a crisis develop almost unnoticed?
Well, it's true that this year we are facing like unprecedented level of hunger level. Many factors, of course, contributed to that, and we have been raising the alarms for quite some time now. We expected that to happen since last year. We said 2023 is going to be a difficult year. Although we had a lot of success in 2022, where we were able to reach around 140 million people, but we were warning, raising the alarms that 2023 is going to be a difficult year. And this is what we are seeing today. Over 340 million people are facing acute hunger. 40 million of them are in the extreme level of hunger, which is one step away from famine. Causes for that are, we know all of it. Start with the conflict, which we are seeing in different parts of the world, from the Middle East to Africa, the Horn of Africa, the Sahel, the Afghanistan, and so on. Climate is also playing similar role as to the conflict in terms of reducing the production of food, in terms of displacing population, as we have seen last year in the Horn of Africa, as Somalia, and so on, and Ethiopia. Economic downturn is another, which is the impact of the COVID-19, which is also another factor that people cannot afford or have no access to food. So all this combined is driving the numbers very high. And at the same time, we are struggling also with funding, because there are now, call it competing priorities, from Afghanistan to Yemen to Syria to the Horn of Africa to the Sahel to Sudan and so on. So projected that this year will be able to reach around 170 million. But our projection, we won't be able to raise the funds that is needed, which is around $24 billion. As I was saying, last year was a success because we were able to raise $14 billion and reach 140 million. But this year, our estimate is that we may be able to reach or raise $10 billion only. So the situation that is, hunger is increasing on one side, and funding is reducing in the other side, which put us in a real difficult situation.
The situation in the Middle East and North Africa seems particularly alarming. Can you give us a breakdown of the crisis in terms of numbers and the countries concerned?
I mean, the Middle East normally is, to a large extent, depends on food import. But then add to it also the situation in a number of countries, like Yemen, okay, like Syria, the economic downturn in Lebanon, the situation in Sudan, which is happening now, which is marked one day as projected to be the food basket of the Middle East. Currency devaluation in Egypt, and all. So all these factors together are affecting, of course, number of population there. Palestine, for example, you have in Gaza, you are talking about 24% unemployment rate. So making affordability is a big factor. Sudan, we are talking about 90 million people that are reaching the level of acute food insecurity. Syria, we're talking about 6 million people. Talking about the refugees in Jordan, the Syrian refugees in Jordan is also another like over 500 million or 500,000, sorry, that we support. The Lebanon, we're hosting already 1 million Syrian refugees. Add to it what is going on the economical side in Lebanon. So all this together makes the situation in the Middle East, as also was saying, that dependency on food import is a big factor in securing the food security there.
The WFP says 345 million people are facing or at risk of acute food insecurity in 79 countries this year. What are the major causes of what the World Food Programme calls a storm of staggering proportions?
Conflict is number one.
Mhm.
Armed conflict remains the number one. If I give you the example of Sudan, for example, you have just in a matter of 4 months since the start of the conflict, you have around 4 million people who are displaced, either moved to another location inside the country or fled the country to neighboring countries. This in itself creates a burden for the recipient countries. Countries like South Sudan, who's already in a situation also where we are struggling to provide assistance there. Now they are receiving refugees from the north. Chad also is another fragile state there. So Sudan is a big example of that. Add to that also the number of fleeing population and so, but then disruption to supply, the trade routes are disrupted. But on top of that, we are there. We started cross-border operation from Chad into West Darfur, and then also reaching other areas in Sudan. With difficulties, we are able to reach Khartoum, but with difficulties. But access remains an issue for us to reach there. So you have Sudan, you have Niger, now started, 3.2 million people that we are projecting that they will need immediate assistance. The malnutrition rate is also high. Somalia, yes, we were able to avert famine last year, but still comes the climate, which is another major factor in the food security, is also we are foreseeing or projecting this year another trend of drought. Floods recently in Burkina Faso also washed away farms, and knowing that the harvest is coming soon in October. So conflict, economic downturn, the climate, and I think climate is really playing a big role in there and need to be is no longer just talks in the rooms, but climate is a real thing affecting food security.
Events such as conflicts, climate shocks, and pandemic are not exactly new on planet Earth. So what is different this time? That they're all happened or are happening together?
Happening together, which lead us to try to prioritize. In other words, meaning take from the hungry to give the starving. That's the situation we are exactly in. When you are faced with increasing number of population that are in need of humanitarian assistance and reduced funding for you, that's exactly what you do. And this is what we're doing now in Afghanistan for the Rohingya population. We reduced our assistance there. And by the way, also reducing assistance or reducing the ration would lead those who were hungry also to upgrade to another alarming level of hunger. So it's happening all, as you said, at the same time, where I remember 15 years ago, we were talking in WFP if we will be able to manage two crises at a time. But now we are talking about more than 10 crises that going on at the time. And you see the effect of all this. You see how the migration through the Mediterranean is increasing from Africa to, and this is all effect of what's happening, be it the conflict, be it the drought, the climate, and food security, and so on, which drive people also because they need a solution. They need to survive at the end of the day.
How big a driver of world hunger is the war in Ukraine, which we know has driven up the cost of food, fuel, and fertilizers? Can viable alternative sources be found?
Positive news is that food prices globally today are back to prior to the Ukraine crisis. So we have seen, of course, sharp increase in April 2022 following the eruption of the war there. That at that time also coupled with increase of the shipping cost, because you had the effect of the COVID, of the supply chain disruption at that time. So on the positive side, we are seeing prices globally are going down or to the level that was prior to the war in Ukraine. We are seeing increase in some commodities like the vegetable oil, because of course the oil seeds that are imported mainly from Ukraine, but the situation inside there is also like we have seen and we will continue to see a reduction in the production of food in Ukraine. Because farmers cannot access their farms, because of the landmines, because of also the access to ports and so on. But we are there in Ukraine. Since the start, we have been able to distribute around 2 billion meals to the population there, and we continue to be there. So the focus is of course helping the Ukrainian, which we estimate like 1 in 3 is facing food security issues there. But again, it's Ukraine. Now we have the Black Sea corridor is no longer operational. There are other alternatives, yes, and we use that. But also for this region in particular, which depends on the Black Sea corridor, this might see increase, of course, of the shipping costs to source these commodities from elsewhere in the world.
The WFP and other aid agencies have been announcing suspensions of food aid and cuts to food subsidies in places where poverty is the highest. Can you tell us about the shortfall in the cases of Syrian refugees in Jordan, Palestinians in Gaza, IDPs and Syrian refugees in Iraq?
This was like one of the most difficult decisions that the program has to make, and this is the last resort that we have to do. Jordan, a country that has opened its borders for the refugees, and has been host to these refugees since 2012, and WFP assistance continued since that time. This is the first time that the population, particularly in the camps, now are facing these ration cuts. We faced this situation back in 2015, where we had to reduce or cut assistance from around 230,000, but they were outside the camps. But now we are like compelled to cut the assistance to those populations in the camps, which never experienced before. And there are like the population or the refugees, they have coping strategies which are negative strategies, reducing the number of meals that they take to give the children, pulling children from schools to send them to work, and then increase the debt also, which then whenever we are able to resume, then imagine that part of the money we give or the cash we give will also go to repay the debts. Palestine is also a similar situation where we had to cut 200,000, or we are planning to do that should we not receive any funding for the Palestine. These are families that depends entirely on WFP assistance, given the situation there, the socioeconomic situation, and the stability also, particularly in Gaza, as I was mentioning, 24% is the unemployment rate. So you can imagine you have 24% unemployment rate, and then you have no source of income. Affordability is a question here. And if no funding that we receive in the near future, that will lead us also to cut more in Palestine. Similarly in Syria, from 5 million, we're cutting also 2 million out of the caseload that we provide assistance. And this is happening this year. We are doing this across the board, either in Afghanistan, for the Rohingya population, in Bangladesh, in Yemen, in Lebanon, in Syria, and in Jordan as well. But Jordan, this is the first time, like, the population in the camps are being cut, or the assistance is reduced.
What is the worst case scenario for these communities? Widespread hunger and malnutrition, or starvation and death?
We have seen it in 2015. Those who were outside the camps, when we cut the assistance to 230, and this was also to hold the region that we were facing funding crisis. What happened is that they opted to take the risk and cross the Mediterranean. And this is what brought the millions who crossed the Mediterranean going to Europe. So this is the likely situation. Migration will increase, of course, but also, as I was saying, there are other coping strategies, that negative ones, that they have to maintain. And this also presents also a burden on the host communities as well. Yeah. And that we cannot also isolate the host communities from what's happening to these refugees, or happening in the country as a whole.
Saudi Arabia has just stepped up its contribution with a $6.8 million donation to prevent suspension of food aid in Jordan. How will this make a difference to the situation on the ground in immediate terms?
This was a rescue to the operations in Jordan, a rescue to the food pipeline that we maintain to the refugees inside the camps, because it was the plan. Coming 1st September, we had to announce that we are cutting or reducing the assistance to the population in the camps. So this comes as a real rescue for our operation in Jordan. And we'll see immediate effect. Around 50,000 will continue to receive their vouchers or food rations continuously without cut. However, there are other also refugees still, because this contribution is directed towards the refugees in the camps. There are refugees outside the camps that still. So should we not receive other contribution from other donors, we are still facing the situation of opting to that solution, which is a very hard decision to make. But this Saudi contribution was a real rescue to our operation in Jordan, and comes at a real well timed with that.
What is the price of not taking immediate action in tackling hunger in the Middle East and North Africa? Who are the people who will pay the biggest price?
The first is those people who are affected by this crisis, be it the displaced, the refugees, or those who are acutely hunger. Because no action means death, means famine, and means death. So, but you have to think also of some other effects that will be there. Migration is one effect of not able to meet unrest, civil unrest that can happen in these countries. We remember in 2007 and 2008, with the food price going high, then we start seeing unrest in different countries. So that's the effects will happen. Migration will increase. People will opt to take that hard decision, so that be it crossing into another countries, or crossing the Mediterranean, going to Europe, and so on. It's a matter of survival, and they had to do this. So, but you cannot, as I was saying, you cannot also isolate the host communities of that, particularly for refugees operations, like in Jordan or in Lebanon or in other places. And that's where we call, what we do in these countries is saving lives. And now with the funding that is shrinking, we are looking into long-term solution. How can we address the root cause of this? So enable the population to stand up again and be able to feed themselves. But in the absence of security, when there is armed conflict, and so, like in Sudan, and so, it's difficult to do that. Yeah. But wherever possible, we're doing this.
What is the hunger situation in Sudan, the wider Sahel belt, and in Ethiopia, a country that was synonymous with hunger and malnutrition in the 1980s?
Sudan now is almost 50% of our population are facing acute food insecurity. The country wasn't in a good shape prior to the conflict, but the conflict came and then added more oil to the fire that was already going. Sudan was a host to refugees from other countries as well, despite the situation, the economic situation of the country. So 19 million people are projected that will need humanitarian assistance. Now, we are facing with issues like access because of the security situation. Khartoum is the most difficult to access at this time. West Darfur is another area where we have difficulties to access. We have been able to bring food from neighboring countries like Chad. We have been able to reach like 1.5 million Sudanese since the start of the conflict. There are also the areas, for example, in North Sudan, which are sort of the calm, but where there are the displaced also who move to this location, and where you have the host communities also are showing also the burdens of this. When you have a country in this crisis, import of food is disrupted, traffic or the trade routes are disrupted, and so on. So it doesn't look good. It wasn't looking good even before the crisis, and now it's going on absolutely wrong direction. The Sahel is also have been experiencing climate issues, armed conflicts that are ongoing there in the Sahel, the Boko Haram and the ISIS and all these things. But there is also political instability and so on. We are seeing the situation in Burkina Faso, where population are crossing into neighboring countries like in Togo, in Benin, in Ivory Coast, and in Ghana. You have the situation positively improved the food security situation in Mali in the past months, where it reduced from 42% to 37%. So there is positive. But then there is a situation now in Niger, where there is sanction and borders are closed, knowing that it's a landlocked country where import is like essential for that. So we are talking about 3.6 million people that we need to reach. 1.5 million of them are on emergency threshold or situation there. The Horn of Africa is again also projected to face another round of droughts, and the ongoing sort of, call it, conflicts there, be it in the Somalia region or in Ethiopia. So all this together is, of course, adding to the situation or the food security situation.
Do you think we'll see something similar to the 1980s, where we saw these large...
We haven't reached there, but we are, of course, better equipped. The world is better equipped than the 1990s, the 1985 and so. One of I think the biggest issue at that time was, did the world know about it? But now with the communication available everywhere, so I would say we're not there, and hopefully we'll not reach that phase.
What message would you send to the governments of food exporting countries whose attempts to check domestic price rises by curbing exports are driving up global food prices even higher? How can you convince the world that lives in the global south are just as precious as those in rich countries?
Well, we have to recognize also every government, they have the right also to protect their citizens, to ensure that their citizens, they have supply, continuous supply at affordable prices to their population. But at the same time, we know that also the world produces food more than it needs. So we are not there at a situation where there is issue of availability of food. Food is available. Right policies would enable this food is distributed or reach different parts of the world. When we are talking about people who are in need of humanitarian assistance, particularly those who are like at the very high level of food insecurity, and our inability to provide that assistance, we know what would be the consequences of that. And those consequences do not stay in that locality, but the whole world will be affected by this. As we have seen previously, the conflict in Syria did not stay in Syria. It affected those who are in Germany, in Europe, in Turkey, and different parts of the world. So it is far cheaper to tackle the situation now than let it exacerbate, where it will be far more expensive to do that. So the message is look at the consequences of not us unable to provide this assistance to those populations. It does not stay there.
What crisis or potential crisis do you believe has the potential to spiral out with devastating effect?
Well, all of them, like particularly when they are no longer in the media, become a forgotten crisis, and this is where we struggle in there. And you see, for example, the first few weeks of the Afghanistan, it was all over the place and so on, but then started to fade away. Similarly, we are seeing now in Sudan. It was on the news every day, but now because there are other crises that comes up, mushrooming up, and this is where the media also need to focus on. So, not forgetting, we should not forget any of these crises, because the danger of it, as I was saying, it does not remain in there, and it expand beyond those. Beyond the borders. Sudan is very potential to become a real, you're talking about 40 million or 40 plus million population. If this crisis continue, and if this crisis continue to be like not a priority, then why I'm saying Sudan? Because where are this population going to go? They are going to cross to neighboring countries. And the situation in neighboring countries is not adequate for hosting this population. You are talking about Chad, who's already a host to Sudanese refugees since 2004. You are talking about South Sudan, another neighboring country, which cannot take more than what it's have there. Ethiopia, and so on. So, and this is the danger of it. All the countries surrounding Sudan, from Chad to Central Africa to South Sudan and so on, they have issues of their own. So, and this is going to be like maybe an unprecedented scale. So you are hungry, and then your neighbor is hungry, and then you're going to, so you can imagine what your neighbor's situation is going to be. And so the need is that what is needed is continue to focus on these crises, on the situation that's happening, be it in the Horn, be it in the Sahel, in Sudan, in the Middle East, and so on, because it will come to a point where everybody will feel the effect of that.
Mr. Abdel-Mageed Yahia, Director of the UAE Office and Representative to the GCC of the World Food Programme, thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.